Guys, as soon as I started editing this episode on the ego, I started to remember so many other things I wanted to talk about, but didn't get the chance to talk about it. And I was just really bummed because I'm just such a fucking perfectionist and I wanted all the information to be in this video. But whatever, I didn't write in my notes to talk about certain aspects. I forgot. So if you guys have more questions that I didn't answer in this episode, you guys can ask me them, and if I feel like there's enough people wanting to know more about it, I'll just make a part 2. I also want to say that in the information I'm giving on the ego, it could be relative because this is the way I perceive it to be, and this is the way it shows up in my life. And a lot of other people or other religions might view the ego differently. So yeah, I just wanted to preface that my opinions and my experiences and the information I have explained in the video about the ego is solely based on me and my own mind and the way I think. But yeah, now let's cut to the video. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the vveydaa Mindset podcast. So I had put up a poll for you guys to vote from on which topic you guys wanted me to talk about. And you guys voted on how the ego runs your life. I was really excited to see that this topic won first place between all the options I put for my poll because this is such a deep topic and I didn't realize you guys wanted to hear more about these types of subjects from me. So I'm ready to get into it with you guys. If you guys haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Go ahead and give a rating to my podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on. It really helps get my podcast out and my channel out to more viewers. Okay, now let's get into it. What actually is the ego? When I say ego, what does that actually mean? I feel like most people, when they think about the ego, they think of someone who's narcissistic or someone who's cocky. And that's a kind of a superficial approach to defining the ego. The ego is so much deeper than that. Your ego is ultimately the mediator between the unconscious and the conscious parts of you. Your ego is what basically gives you an identity. It separates you from everything else in the world. It's what allows you to label yourself and everything else outside of you. Your ego uses your beliefs, your attachments, your emotions as a lens to filter your life through. And like I said, your ego is what allows you to have an identity. So it allows you to form your concept of self and who you believe you are. It allows you to develop goals, ambitions, aspirations, interests that you want to indulge in. And one of the biggest reasons you have an ego, if not the reason that it was developed into you in the first place, is to protect you. Your ego's number one job is to protect you from any perceived threat, literal or figuratively. I was also thinking about explaining how the ego came to be in its most basic form through the psychoanalytic approach of psychology, but I decided that I didn't want to make this episode too long and I wanted to make it easily digestible for you guys. But if you guys have any questions on the deeper basis of how our ego came to be and why we literally cannot be a human and function without it, you guys can go ahead, talk about it in the comments, ask me questions, or DM me. I love talking about this subject. So I'm very opposed to the view of needing to kill your ego. I do not believe that your ego is your enemy, that it's the villain, that it's trying to do wrong in your life. It genuinely doesn't know any better, and its job is to protect you, but it doesn't understand that it's actually making you suffer. But again, I'm not trying to villainize the ego. I'm just trying to make you aware of it. I genuinely do believe that living in this 3D world calls to have an ego. We cannot survive in the world we live in without our ego. Usually, the people who talk about trying to kill your ego, I would say, come from a more toxic positivity approach. They genuinely do mean well, but in their approach, they view things as needing to act and think from love and behave from love and unity at all times. And as enticing as that sounds, because everyone in the world mainly behaves from their ego, if you didn't at all, you probably would just be stepped all over constantly. You might be getting screwed over a lot. You may not be taking the necessary steps to protect yourself. Because basically what our ego does is allow us to not go back to things that hurt us. So if we don't have that part of us, we might not have an understanding of what not to go back to. And because our world operates from a 3D egoic basis, we cannot cultivate the life that these people in toxic positivity are trying to go for. The only way we could cultivate a life of solely acting from love and unity and never from our ego is if every single person was like that. But because most of our world is acting from their ego, we need to act from our ego to a certain degree as well to protect ourselves. I hope that makes sense. So before diving deep about how our ego is controlling our lives, usually in every aspect, and how to manage our ego where it's not causing us to suffer, I'm gonna go over the benefits of having an ego and how it shows up in our life in a positive way. So like I said earlier, having an ego is what allows us to have goals and make plans of actions to reach those goals. If we didn't have an ego, we would have no concept of delayed gratification. We would solely be acting from our instinct. We would solely be acting on instant gratification. I want that, give that to me now. But our ego is what allows us to mediate our imagination and our reality and allow us to make plans of action. The ego basically allows us to make long-term goals in order to make something of ourselves, in order to make something of our life. And speaking of trying to make something of ourselves, the only reason humans have the desire to achieve or become someone or become something or make something out of their life is because of the ego's desire for identity, attachments, and placing meaning on everything and everyone around us. Your desire to become an athlete, a business owner, a singer, an influencer, that's all coming from your ego. Your ego thrives on these labels, these schemas and constructs that the 3D world has developed. Our ego is also what protects us from pain. It's what allows us to have defense mechanisms. It's what allows you to not go back to a past partner who has treated you horribly. It's what allows you to not accept mistreatment from your friends or family members. Another way we see this is in really, really bad trauma in childhood. Usually when people have gone through abuse or sexual abuse at all as a child, they don't fully remember what happened. And that's because your ego in that moment had repressed that memory to protect you. Your ego is what also allows you to form positive perceptions of yourself. It allows you to form a positive self-concept. Statements such as, I am confident, I am beautiful, I am strong. This is all your ego. This is your ego placing labels upon yourself and forming yourself an identity. And these positive perceptions that your ego takes on does benefit you in lifting you up, bettering your mental health, and bettering your self-esteem and well-being. So as you can see, although the ego gets a really bad rep, it definitely does have its benefits and it does think that it's helping you. Now, we live in a world of duality where there's always opposites. So just as helpful the ego can be, it can also cause us some suffering. When a person is living through solely their ego and not their authentic self or their soul, it can be kind of detrimental. When you're solely living through your ego's desires and perception of reality, the highs are really high, but the lows are extremely low. I, by no means, am someone who can tell you, oh yeah, I've broken out of my ego. Like, I never act through my ego. I'm all love and light all the time. Like, I know how to mediate through my ego. No. That is not where I'm coming from at all. I act through my ego almost every single day. But the reason why I'm excited to talk to you guys about the ego today is because I am so self-aware of my own ego. I now can tell the difference between my authentic self and my ego's perceptions. I can see every single day when my ego is coming up, when it's making me perceive things negatively, when it's making me egotistical, when it's making me compare myself to people, when it's making me assume and project or become offended. I have trained myself to tell the difference between my authentic self, my soul, and my ego. And that's what I want for you guys. I want you guys to be able to start hearing the part of you that is your ego and the part of you that's your authentic self and who you actually want to show up as. One of the biggest ways I've seen people lead with their egos, and I've seen myself lead with my ego, is the fact that you base your self-worth upon the labels you place upon yourself and the achievements you have. So basically, your ego wants you to base your self-esteem upon all external factors. It wants you to base your self-esteem on your appearance, on your job, on your skill set, on your accomplishments. When you base your self-esteem on external factors, when you base your self-worth on everything outside of you, this is when you fluctuate a lot in how secure you are in yourself. This is why you get triggered. This is why you can't handle coming across somebody else who has more than you or who is better in any given skill set that you're basing your self-worth on. So this is why a lot of people start to be very judgmental. Like, they develop this very judgmental internal voice in them that comes out every time they're triggered. Because let me give you an example. Let's say somebody bases their self-worth upon their beauty. Their ego loves feeling worthy because they believe that they are beautiful. Anytime they come across somebody else who they believe is prettier than them or more attractive than them, they will start to get triggered because your identity that your ego has developed and that has based its self-worth upon is being threatened. So usually what people do in this state is start to kind of become a little bit judgmental. When this person who bases their self-worth upon their ego's desires, which is their physical appearance, when they see a person that's more attractive than them, they will start to nitpick that person. They will break that person apart. In their heads, they will say, oh, well, they don't have this and they don't have this like me. And I'm smarter and I'm better in all these other ways, so it doesn't matter. That's your ego. Your ego is trying to judge the other person so hard to sustain your identity, to sustain your high self-worth, when it's honestly not a true high self-worth because you're basing it upon a bunch of external factors. Another way a person might go about this is, instead of, overcompensating and starting to insult or demean the other person in their mind, they will start to just shatter. They will start to think very lowly of themselves. They will start to feel like, I'm worthless, I'm ugly, everyone's better looking than me, I suck, I'm horrible. That is also your ego. Your ego is basically beating you to the pain and the suffering so that you don't have to hear it from anybody else. So if you end up coming to that conclusion yourself, it feels safer. So if we're being honest with ourselves, I would say almost every single person does this. And it's a very unconscious thing too. Like, if you don't completely do it consciously every time, I'm sure you can watch yourself do it unconsciously. Your ego doesn't just base your self-worth upon your identity and the labels you place upon yourself. It also bases your self-worth on people hurting you. So this is where we see a lot of people feeling like they're unlovable or they suck or they're unworthy because maybe their romantic partners keep leaving them or cheating. The reason why your ego personalizes, other people's actions towards you and makes it about you is because this is basically what it was taught to do in your early stages of life. Whenever you went through something traumatic, your ego ends up saying, okay, this hurt. I don't understand why this happened, and it must be because of me. It takes the pain other people have inflicted upon to us and it makes it personal. So moving forward, anytime somebody doesn't treat you right, or they leave you, or they screw you over, your ego takes this very personally. You start to feel like there's something wrong with you, that you're unworthy, that you're unlovable, that there's something internally wrong. But that's obviously not the case. People's infliction of pain towards us has nothing to do with us and everything to do with them. But of course, it's really hard for our ego to understand this. Other ways our ego is trying to protect us but actually causes us suffering is its need to constantly be assuming. It takes our past pain and applies it to any possible future circumstance and means to protect us from going into similar outcomes. For example, if you were cheated on in the past, your ego is going to really want you to believe that you need to look out for that in every single one of your future potential partners. And this makes people be very paranoid, very untrusting, and they ultimately end up self-sabotaging any healthy relationships that they could have come across. Your ego constantly wants you to assume worst case scenario. It wants you to see the worst in people because it believes that if it can foresee something bad happening, that it could protect you before it does. This is where people start projecting, where people start creating fights with their partners for no reason because they're driven by their ego's desires and their ego's fears. This is also why we end up self-sabotaging things. We leave good people or good connections because our ego is too scared of getting hurt. And it's trying to look out for us and not put us in the same circumstance again. One of the biggest ways I see my ego have a grasp on me, and in my life most recently, is its need for perfectionism, self-absorption, neuroticism, becoming the best, and just not fucking up. Because what I realized about myself was I based my self-worth on the labels I placed upon myself, or the labels my ego placed upon myself. And these labels were like, I don't know, go-getter, smart, knowledgeable, hustler. Just always trying to prove to myself that I am the best. I am the best at anything I take on and I want to do. And every single day that maybe I didn't get a task done, or something didn't go according to plan, or I didn't do well enough in something, I started to feel really insecure. Like I judged myself a lot. And I think that's my ego's way of basically like overcompensating for judgment. Like I became a perfectionist and an overachiever because my ego thrived on getting its validation from all the goals I was completing. But even when I completed a goal, I didn't feel satisfied. Like the satisfying feeling was really short-lived. My ego constantly craved more and more. It needed more goals to achieve. It needed more certifications to attain. It needed more obstacles to go through to keep proving to myself that I am the best and I am perfect. So that's just one particular way that the ego has shown itself through me most recently. Another way the ego comes out for me is that I hate to be wrong. That is my ego's way of preserving this identity of smart and knowledgeable and all-knowing. I know that is the labels my ego has placed upon myself. And in doing that, it makes me not like to lose arguments. And this comes out in my romantic relationships. And this is something that I'm actively working on. I have become better at not leading with my emotions, not leading with my ego, and understanding that sometimes my perception and my view of things was incorrect. But you'll see that people that lead with their ego, they don't like to be wrong. They don't like to lose arguments. They don't like to be perceived as the villain in the argument. And it could be for various reasons. But at the end of the day, when you don't like to be wrong, when you don't like to lose arguments, it's because you're leading with your ego. Another way you see someone leading with their ego is if they're very easily offended. Everywhere this person goes, there could be something or someone that is threatening their identity that their ego has built for them. And that's why they're very easily offended. When someone calls them out on something, or when someone disagrees with them, or someone has something to say about them, they think that this means something about their identity, and they bite back, or they become very defensive and lead with a lot of emotion because their ego is really uncomfortable. Their ego doesn't like to be tested. Their identity does not want to be tested. They take everything personally, and that's why they're very easily offended. Someone who doesn't lead with their ego, they're not very easily offended at all because they don't take anything personally. They're very neutral. You can usually tell your ego coming up whenever you feel an extreme of any emotion. If you're feeling really insecure, if you're really insulting yourself, if you're feeling really worthless, that's your ego coming up. If you're feeling very boastful, very egoic, very self-absorbed, feeling like you're on a pedestal or people are below you or people have something to learn from you and you use it as a way to feel better about yourself, that is very much in your ego. In order to not let our ego run us, we want to become more neutral. We don't want to become too insecure or feeling unworthy, but we also don't want to become too cocky. We want to find a balance in between the two. Ultimately, given all these examples I've explained where you can see your ego, running your choices, running your life, making you feel a certain way, the bottom line is to learn how to maneuver through this. You want to be able to calm your ego so you can begin maneuvering through your ego's attachments, defense mechanisms, and illusions. And one of the first things I started doing to begin maneuvering through my ego is stop basing my self-worth upon the identity my ego has attached itself to. I like to remember that I'm worthy and lovable no matter what. It doesn't matter the things I've accomplished. It doesn't matter my physical appearance. It doesn't matter what I have attained or what I have or how much money I have. It doesn't have anything to do with any of these things. But I used to operate based upon these things being a measurement of my worth and value. Like, I didn't feel worthy unless I had these external factors to show for it. Now I always remind myself that I'm lovable and worthy no matter what. Stop letting your ego base your self-worth and your self-esteem upon external factors. Next, you want to keep your judgmental voice in check. That judgmental voice that puts people down or puts people higher than you, where you feel like people are on a pedestal above you, that's your ego. Your ego likes to place people on hierarchies. Your ego likes to form levels that people are on, and it likes to place you on a pedestal or it likes to place other people on a pedestal above you. And this is all your ego's way of labeling people and judging things around you. So what you want to do is quiet this judgmental voice in your mind. Quiet that voice in your mind that's constantly judging people, nitpicking people, insulting people when you're triggered, insulting yourself, demeaning yourself, feeling like you're below people. Quiet that judgmental voice. The next thing you want to do is stop taking anything personally. And of course, this is really hard because we say not to take insults personally, but then when someone calls us beautiful, we take that personally. And that's the thing, with not taking things personally, it needs to go both ways. You cannot let compliments hold so much value, just like you're not letting insults hold so much value. You need to allow yourself to become neutral. You can appreciate compliments. You can appreciate constructive criticism, but you're not making that mean anything about you or your character. Lastly, you want to start practicing behaving from your authentic self, from your soul. Because a lot of times, like I said, our ego is trying to protect us. And when it's trying to protect us, it cultivates this pessimistic attitude in us. It cultivates this fear and these impulsive actions that we take in means to protect ourselves from any perceived pain. And in order to counteract that, you want to start pausing before you make irrational decisions. You want to start asking yourself, is what I'm noticing actually real? Is the assumption that my ego is coming up with right now actually valid? Can I sit back and think logically about what's going on? Do I have to assume the worst case scenario in this circumstance right now? And most times, if we lead with our true self, with our soul, we see that we didn't need to put up a bunch of walls, that we didn't need to run away from someone that was good for us, that we didn't need to self-sabotage, that we didn't need to accuse people, that we didn't need to act irrationally. So ultimately, like I said, your ego isn't bad. It's not the villain. It's honestly just there to give you a sense of self, a sense of identity, also protect you. And in doing so, it might cause you to suffer instead, but it just doesn't know any better. What you can begin doing is choosing to move through your true self, your authentic self, your soul instead of your ego. Become aware of when your ego is coming up. Use the examples I said and start looking out for that in real time. Whenever you start seeing your ego come up, that's when you can start counteracting it and maneuvering through it and living life more through the lens of love and unity instead of separation and fear. You need to remember that you are worthy, lovable, and important no matter what your ego is telling you. Your ego wants you to base your self-worth and your importance on everything outside of you. So the mistakes you made, the people who hurt you, your physical attributes, what you have, what you don't have. And it's important to not let this take up your life and not let this be the measurement of your worthiness. You need to begin understanding that no matter your ego's desires or your ego's fears or your ego's measurement of importance, you deep down know that you're important and lovable and worthy no matter what. Because that's the thing with the ego. When the ego is in the driver's seat, it literally has so much effect on our self-esteem. When the ego is not in the driver's seat, you have true sense of security. You feel truly worthy from the inside out. You understand that you don't need anything outside of you to feel worthy, like your ego is telling you. That you are just worthy, important, and lovable because you're alive. So people who don't let their ego take the driver's seat are usually very secure individuals. They're very rational. They don't lead with their emotions like their ego wants them to do. They don't lead through fear. They don't think worst case scenario. They don't think the worst in people. So I hope this episode has given you some sort of understanding of the way the ego is showing up in your life and maybe some ways you can begin getting to know your ego and maneuvering through it so you can live a life of ultimately less suffering. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Go ahead and follow me on my socials. I'll post them in the description and I'll see you guys in the next episode.